Jujutsu Kaisen is mid, is what I would say if I was stupid. Hi, welcome to this video. Gege ended a few days ago, and the ending was very, let's say, controversial. I would say, I think, because there was a lot of different opinions and a lot of disappointments, and I personally had some issues with it as well. So it's not like I'm not saying it's perfect, but I really wanted to come here and talk about the whole thing as a whole, the ending, whether or not I think it was good, it was bad, what does it even mean to be like a bad ending, and also the whole story from beginning to end.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Loka?
This video is going to be in three parts because there's three main points that I want to make. The first part is going to be obviously we're going to talk about the ending and the whole story. But before any of those, I thought let's talk about the worst ending in shonen trend, because it is a trend at this point. Let's get out of the way. The worst ending is always the one happening at the moment, and it's something that we've seen happen again and again and again and again, because there is a certain group of people online that will never actually be satisfied. Like, it doesn't matter how good something is or how bad something is, there is always going to be those people who are like, this is actually the worst thing ever, and I would do it better if I was the writer. But you're not. You wouldn't do it better. Having headcanons about certain characters that already exist and are established is a lot different from building those characters from the start to finish. And I think that's the point a lot of people online completely forget when it comes to their criticisms of something. Recency hate, I think personally, is a real thing, and JJK is one of its biggest and most prominent victims, because as I said, there's this big group of people online who seem to never be satisfied with anything. Like, they open something with the expectation of hating it, and when you look at things like that, you're gonna find something to hate. Like, that's how it works. A big group of people, as I said, who see criticism and having kind of a literary analysis of anything as just bashing it and calling it bad and calling it badly written and this and this and this and that. And that is not the case. Like, you can enjoy something but also have criticisms on it. You can have flaws, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So yeah, that's like a trend, I think, at this point. And these groups of people are basically kind of, they're bound to hate everything, because when you open the story with the expectation of hating it without even knowing what's going to happen in it, you're gonna find something to hate. Like that's how it is. Like, when you see someone and you feel like you don't like them, and then every single thing they do annoys you. Like, that's how this is as well. Also, I forgot to say at the beginning, I have my children here, and I just moved countries, so my room is a mess. But I wanted to film this video, so you have to deal with me and these two sitting right here. There's also this obsession with hating the popular thing to feel different, which is a real thing. And like, something can be super, super, super loved, but the second it goes popular and it becomes mainstream, the same people who liked it for being niche will start hating it because it's now popular, and which is like such a stupid thing to criticize a piece of media for, because being able to reach kind of this level of popularity is a skill. It's not something anything can do. There's a lot of stories out there with similar themes to Demon Slayer, to JJK, to AOT, to My Hero Academia, to a lot of other stuff, but none of them are on this level, because there's something about these stories that makes them different from the other ones. Mainstream things can be kind of annoying and stupid and fan service, but not all of them are. Most of them are not, and most of them go popular because they do something special in a different way than everything else in that genre, because there's practically nothing new or, at this point, original. Most of things are cliches. Most of things have happened before, have been done before, but each new story, each new author, each new maker of them, creator, puts their own spin on it and uses them in their own way, which makes them special. So hating the popular thing is just a stupid thing. And there's a big group of people online. Like, there's people literally making hate videos about JJK, and then the next video is how them also saying the fact that they don't even read it, or they just keep up with the leaks. Or like, there's videos about questions that were unanswered, and then there's what was the deal between Yuji and Sukuna? Like, that was answered a long time ago. There's also this obsession with hating anything that has a big female audience, which, and trying to belittle anything women like, and it always happens to be the anime stories that have a big fan base that get a lot of hate for being stupid, and specifically the fangirls and certain characters who happen to have more female fans also end up being the most hated sometimes. Yeah, try being a Gojo fan on Twitter for 2 days. Yeah, it's not great. So no, JJK, AOT, My Hero Academia, One Piece, whenever it's going to end and starts to get hated, none of them are the worst ending in history. They could be not perfect, they could have flaws, they could be completely against what you wanted for the story, but that doesn't make them bad. As long as they make sense to their own narrative, they're not a bad ending. Because some of you need to like read and watch stuff that have actual bad endings and have your favorite characters butchered because the certain people who were writing the show after it exceeded the books didn't know how to handle a really smart character, and then you can talk. Because yeah, it's not a good experience, and it's not this either. So no, none of those are the worst ending in history or the worst ending ever happening. Whatever Chainsaw Man is going to end, it's going to be called that. Anything that ends, it's going to be called that, because for some people, being satisfied with anything, for them, I don't know, it takes away from being a literary critic or whatever that is. Like, my guy, you're on Twitter trying to make money because you have a blue checkbox. Also, a few statements that are very funny, that are very prominent when it comes to people hating JJK or loving JJK. They both use these statements. And a lot of what it's hated for is also what made it this popular. And one of the first parts is it's not a typical shonen, but it's still a shonen. Those are two things that can coexist and actually do. One of my favorite things about JJK is its use of cliches, because I'm personally a defender of cliches. Let me tell you that. Cliches exist because they work, because they're good, and they work, and it's absolutely fine to use them. It's absolutely fine to make a story entirely around it. If a story is like simple and uses them, it doesn't make it bad. It's not everything should have like 3 hour long video essays for you to understand it. For example, Demon Slayer gets a lot of hate for having a simple storytelling, a simple kind of world building, and that's just, it works. Those cliches exist because they work, and Demon Slayer uses them in the best way possible, for example. And JJK has its own kind of a spin on it, which is very interesting to me. It took a lot of the shonen battle cliches that we've seen happen, we've seen done, we've seen work. It put its own spin on it. For example, would be the whole explaining your technique part, and the fact that it makes you work better, like when you're poisoned, and if you think about it constantly, it will get worse. If you have a toothache and you think about it, it gets worse. We also have, for example, Gojo, the overly used sensei who's cool and whatever, but the difference here is that he's quite different from a lot of what we're used to, that overpowered kind of master in the story. While a lot of those characters are usually very serious, very kind of stoic and stuff like that, Gojo is not like that. He's practically a child sometimes. He can be scary, he can be terrifying, but he also loves being a goofy 20 something year old, which we see him be. And his entire character is a lot of times a spin on the typical shonen story of the strongest, because with him we don't just see how cool it is, we also see the downsides of it. We see how lonely and awful it can be for you to be a weapon from birth to your demise, which we see him, which we're going to get into. He has, he's into his own part because he's my favorite character and I can do what I want with my video. Kind of thing that JJ completely skips on is the kind of backstory thing and character interactions in the way that we're used to them, and it gets a lot of criticism for it. And while I also understand a lot of people like it that way, it's like their preferred way of seeing characters interact, it's not the only way. And someone choosing to not use that, especially because considering the fact that he has spoke about his dislike for the kind of backstory thing, stuff like that. JJK, the battle part of shonen is used to further the characters. A lot of character interactions, a lot of growth for them happens during these battles, and it's actually integrated into the power system, because we know that their growth is not linear. It happens in the like height of the fight. That's when growth happens, and that is something a lot of shonen called stupid for, and JJK just puts that into the world building, and that is Personally, I find it very good. In JJK, the battles are used to further characters, their dynamics, their views, and whether or not which one is right. They don't need backstories to grow. That's done to how they fight, how they do it, who they do it for, and who comes out on the top. So it's not just mindless punches and mindless fights, but the fights are also really good. Like the hype of the JJK fight is cannot be denied. Like yeah, it had the entire world by storm last year, and it wasn't even animated. It was just the manga. Like you could not run away from it, even if you went on like anime Twitter and anime manga Twitter. And I think a lot of issues comes from people expecting something to happen and then it not happening, and kind of mistaking that with it being badly written, because something not happening, something that you liked or something that you thought would be interesting not happening, it doesn't make it bad. Like for example, the merger, which is like the biggest headcanon in this entire fandom. The merger was introduced as worst possible outcome of the Cullen games. It wasn't going to be the next big thing. From the start, it was kind of obvious that the story started with Sukuna and it was going to end with Sukuna. The merger was introduced as the worst possible thing that could happen. And for it to happen, everyone had to die. So people being mad that, oh, it's kind of a waste for it to know. It was interesting, yeah. It was very interesting. It would be a very interesting concept, but it didn't work in the world building for it to even happen. Everyone would have to literally die. There could be no merger if anyone survived. So it was just, it was like a very funny kind of thing for me to see people make arts about how this could be the better ending, and there was like Yuji and Megumi there when they would have to die for it to happen. Or the concept of backstories, someone like Sukuna doesn't need one. He's evil for the sake of being evil because he can and he wants to, and he's better than everyone at it. And that's one of my favorite things about him, because while I really love villains that are fleshed out and have reasons behind what they do, people can also be evil just because they want to, and they're powerful enough to do it. And he's like the one of the best examples of it, at least in recent kind of media. And I absolutely love him, and you can't deny that he's kind of basically iconic at this point. I don't need his entire childhood and backstory to understand why he does the things he does. I can believe the fact that he's doing it because he wants to, and because his view on world is basically only through the lens of being powerful, because that's established through the story from the first moment that we see him, that he's not just a regular person, he's a curse, and he's the worst of them. And Kinjaku, who's literally doing shit because he wants to see how it happens, like what comes out of it. And I honestly love him for that. That's one of my favorite parts of Ninjaku, because I've seen these memes of like, you ask them what why they do something, and they, for Kenjaku they put like explanations. He's not. He literally just does things because he wants to see what happens. He wants to see shit go down. Like, and I respect that so much. I love him for that. Kenjaku is like an evil piece of shit, but he's also so cool. I love him as well, but I also hate him. And finally, there's this kind of obsession with bad endings and assuming that something ending in a dark matter in like a bad way also means it's better than when things happen on a happier note. And it's kind of, I personally don't understand that expectation, because JJK never felt like the story, like a pessimistic story. It was dark, obviously. There's a lot of awful things that happen. It's dark fantasy, but it was never pessimistic. It was never kind of nihilistic, I would say. And that's like one of the biggest points in the story, like the clash of ideas between Sukuna and Yuji. A lot of it revolves around that. And the main character, Yuji, now that he's mentioned, is literally represents being like a breath of fresh air in that dark jujutsu world. Someone who sees human beings as being people, as wanting to, someone who wants to save them and cherish them and values life against a system that literally only sees them as cogs in a machine that can be replaced, as tools to use until they don't have any abilities anymore. And it's the clash of those things that's one of the biggest and most integral part of the story. So, and throughout this entire story, we see them try to find little moments of joy and happiness in the midst of everything bad that happens. We have Gojo, who's like a very, very tragic character, but at the same time, he also has a lot of love for life. He loves his students. He's obviously stuck in the past as well, but he also loves being alive, and we see that in him. His dream and everything, and Gojo's dream as well. Like a lot of people expected everyone to die, and I was like, that doesn't even make sense to his character. Like that would be a bad ending for him if everyone were just going to die and nothing changes, because it does change, and we're going to talk about that in the ending. The entire arc between like Sukuna, Gojo, and Yuji, they view exactly that part of the world differently, with Sukuna only seeing everything through the lens of power and personal gain, while the other two also believe to fight for other people, and we gonna talk about that. You know what? I'm mixing up the segments, so I'm gonna stop doing that. So yeah, I think a lot of people were actually kind of disappointed by their own expectations that they made for themselves of things that they wanted to happen, when those things weren't even kind of established by Gege to be bound to happen. Like Nobara's comeback was bound to happen. It was kind of obvious. I'm sorry, if you actually paid attention to the story, you would see it. Especially the difference between her treatment after death and other characters who were seriously dead, like Nanami and Geto. I feel like a lot of the criticism and problems comes from this story that people wanted to see happen rather than the one Gege Akutami actually wanted to tell. And I mean, it's absolutely fine for you to be disappointed of the potential that was there, because yes, there was a lot of potential. There was a lot of things that could happen, but they didn't. They weren't necessary. They would be great. Like I personally have a lot of things that I wish I could see. Love to see Megumi grow. I would love to see him kind of become more powerful, become more content with himself, all of those things. But they didn't need to happen, and they weren't integral parts of his character. And we're gonna get into that later again. Kind of a segment on the overall kind of reaction to the ending and reaction to JJK in general. Now let's get into my own problems with the ending and like the ending as a whole. The ending is not perfect. It's not. And I personally have a lot of problems with it. But it's pretty good. Majority of the themes that were established through the story were answered. And a lot of my personal problems with it comes from interesting themes and concepts that I personally would love to see more of, but they weren't really necessary to like make this ending make sense. There's a story as someone who believes his life is a good price to pay if it saves other people, and throughout the entire thing, he goes through growing out of that, and his dynamic with Sukuna also a lot revolves around that, and we see who comes out alive out of it and who's actually right. You realize that like the proper death is not really what expects or the time and place he thinks is right, but rather something about how that person lived their life to that point and whether they are content with it. We see him, he doesn't try to mindlessly save Megumi the second time he reaches to him, but rather gives him the choice of whether he wants to come back or not, and understands that he's reached the point that maybe coming back is not really what he wants anymore because of everything that's happened. And expecting him to die after going through all of that is stupid. Like, I'm sorry, if you expected Yuji to die at the end, it was your own fault for being disappointed. And even to the ending, he stood his ground. He even offered the demon who ruined his entire life and killed so many people he loved to save him. But obviously he refused because he's the biggest hater of all time. But also he died being reduced to what he was really at his core, and that was a curse. And that was like a really good part. So I really didn't understand the criticism on Sukuna's ending, because he ran an entire gauntlet for a year. He proved himself as being that strong. But at the end, his death came in his true form, in his what he was really at his core, and that was a tiny teeny curse. Characters mainly got endings that made sense to their arcs rather than the one that would be the most satisfactory to us as readers. And an example of that would be Megumi. Like, yes, I personally would love to see a lot more of him, but that's not really what he wanted, really. And I think that's kind of the point, because he had the potential to grow even a lot more, but that's not what he wanted. He loved being fighting, yes. He had the potential to be like on the level of someone like Gojo, but that's not what he wanted. That's in the end what he wanted was a simple, okay life, a mundane life, and that's what he got basically, almost, not perfectly, but almost. And him choosing to live with you for Yuji this time, I've seen a lot of people calling it like bad because he didn't grow out of his mindset, and that's like the most sane thing for happening to him, because it's completely different from his choice of wanting to live for Sumiki. Um, because it was more out of guilt. But this part, well, yes, a part of him wants to live for someone else still, but a big part of that wanting to live for somebody else is because of his own selfishness of also wanting to be happy and experience different things. And that's kind of a really big step for someone as with a mindset mindset as self-destructive as his, that's like a biggest step in growing out of it. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen at once and him coming and being like, okay, I no longer want to live like that. It doesn't happen like that. If you've met someone or are someone who uh, experiences that kind of mindset, I personally have been, and I think it makes a lot of sense for him to gradually grow out of it, and I think we can expect him to do so in a future that sadly we won't see. And then there's Gojo. Look, Gojo's arc is probably the almost perfect one out of the characters up until 261. His similarity and dynamic with Sukuna and the kind of clash of views is also one of the most interesting parts of the story, and it deserves his own entire kind of thing. He did win because Gojo, while being the strongest, he also chose to save other people, raise the next generation to be different from what he and his generation were, so that none of them really would be alone like he was. None of them would have to be kind of the bearer of that title all by themselves. He was content enough with his life, with his desires, to go south to stay the person that he was from the start, because he did win. He got what his dream did become reality in the end, and it was a very beautiful arc. And he's truly a tragic character because obviously, while, as I said, his dream came true, he's not there to see it. Throughout his entire life, he was very alone. He was very lonely, but not very alone. He was treated as a weapon, tried to change the system, and it did, but wasn't there anymore to experience it for himself. A lot of people kind of completely forget this part, that while Gojo was lonely, he wasn't really alone. A part of him was stuck in the past and his blue spring of youth and what happened with Geto, but that wasn't all of him. That wasn't his entirety of 28 years of life. And I think that's actually one of the best parts of their dynamics, that while that care of love for each other was there, it was never enough for them to throw away their bigger dream and bigger ideals in life and what they wanted to create. It wasn't all of him that would be content with dying and being with Geto. It would be a part of him, but not his all. And I think it's unfair to completely erase that 10 years that happened afterward. The problem is the handling of him after 261. And while I understand the love choice, and I think it was satisfactory, especially with the last page showing that his dream lives on through Yuji, he's not your typical side character. He's arguably one of the most influential parts of the story and like new gen manga as a whole. So completely erasing him and ignoring his existence by the characters after his death, especially while they're established about, like, the way they care about him is completely established through the story. That's like a flaw that I can't, like, it doesn't, how many times someone explains to me how I'm stupid and I'm just being a fangirl online, it just doesn't make sense. I can have criticisms while also liking the ending. So there's that. Like us, we have no explanations as to how Utah actually survived, because that was a situation that was going to end in death for him. That as long as it was established. And he's just fine. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I could go on a long rant about each of the characters and what I have problems with and not, but it would be a long time, and we don't want to be here for that. So yeah, the ending wasn't bad. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad. And for the most part, it answered the questions that needed to be answered. It established the thing that needed to be established, and it did a good job. So yeah, even if the ending was actually really bad, it wouldn't still ruin the whole thing. As a whole, really took the world by the storm. Its characters, it's the week-to-week experience, the fights and everything is something that you can't come by very often, and we probably won't for a while, at least to the level that this was. And there's something to say about that. I think Jujutsu is a story that you kind of need empathy for enjoying. You just need empathy to enjoy it, because it's the type of story that you need to feel for the characters, despite the fact that most of it is battles and fights. I think if you're only here for that, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to enjoy it if you expect the character to just get up and continue fighting when their whole reason of becoming a sorcerer was killed by their own hands. And you're not going to enjoy it if you don't feel empathy for a kid who's just ready to throw away his life at any given point because he feels responsible to save anyone and everyone. Enjoy it if you don't feel sympathy for this character who's like the overpowered OP one, but is also extremely lonely and is stuck in the memory of the one time and the one person in his life who did not make him feel as a weapon first and a human being second, and how he became a victim to that. Even in the end, despite the fact that he changed that world for the others, he became the biggest victim of it for himself. It is a battle manga, but you also need to have sympathy for the characters in it and have an human understanding of them and expect them to act the way a normal human would. If you expect them to act like overpowered and strong, you're not going to enjoy it. It was a beautiful combination of battle manga, dark themes, character journeys, and questions that were either answered or were left for interpretation. You could think of them the way you want. It was left for you to answer whether one was right and the other, and while the other bigger ones, whether Sikuna's view or Yuji's view were right, were answered to the story. And even if the ending was even not good at all, I think I would still love it. And I said that before the ending even came out, and I still stand by it because at the end, while the ending point is important, it's a very important part of the story. It's still just a part of it. It's not the whole thing. It doesn't define the entire thing unless it really ruins characters. Okay, and that didn't happen here. And I think no matter the ending, the journey, the fights, the feelings that it made me personally feel, the moments that it kept me on the edge of my seat, the things that it did that took everyone by the storm, none of that was ruined by the ending. It's still there. You can still experience it, and you can't deny how good it was when it was good. Entire unique experience of going through it with it for the past, for me personally, like around a year or so, and for other people who kept up with it from 6 years ago, even more, wasn't really ruined by the ending. And it wouldn't be even if it was really bad. And it's definitely not now, just because I'm not completely satisfied with everything. So yeah, that was my rant. Despite its flaws, it was still a really special story and something that I will cherish for a very long time. And also the amount of work and genius and kind of research that's clearly put onto it, because there's a lot of things and small details that you can kind of pick up on in rereads and rewatches, and it just shows the amount of care and love that's been put into it by its creator. Even a lot of my personal problems with the ending come from the expectation this story has made of itself for me, and that's also kind of a compliment to Gege's work, because this ending would probably be perfect for another story for me, but because it's this one, because of what I know it can be, how incredible I know it can be, I'm not completely satisfied with it. And that's a compliment to how good it has been throughout. I think that's it. I think my roommates think I'm insane because I've been sitting here talking to myself for a full hour. Hopefully they didn't hear me, because that would be embarrassing. But yeah, that was it. If you watched up until now, thank you for watching this video, and go to come back next week. Bye.